When my grandfather passed away, my brother got the restaurant. I got a rusted auto repair shop on the edge of Route 9 that hadn't seen a customer in 4 years. My husband laughed so hard, he had to set down his wine glass. That was the night everything changed. Not because I was angry, but because I finally walked into that shop alone, and what I found inside my grandfather's old desk made my hands go completely still. Before I tell you what it was, my name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, I teach middle school English, and until 8 months ago, I believed that working hard and keeping quiet was enough. I believed that if you loved someone long enough, they would eventually see your value. I was wrong about that, but I was right about something else. Something my grandfather knew before any of us did. He passed on a Tuesday in early March. Quietly, the way he did most things. He was 81, and he had built 2 things in his life that he was proud of. A family restaurant that had fed half the county for 30 years, and a small auto repair shop out on Route 9 that he opened when he was young and ran until his knees gave out a decade ago. After that, he just kept the property. Never sold it. Never explained why. The will reading happened at a lawyer's office downtown. My brother sat across from me with his wife, both of them dressed like they already knew the outcome. My husband sat beside me. He kept checking his phone. The lawyer read slowly. The restaurant, all 3 locations, the equipment, the accounts, the name, everything went to my brother. My brother exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. His wife squeezed his hand. My husband looked over at me with an expression I can only describe as pity. Then the lawyer continued. The Route 9 property, including the auto repair building and all surrounding land, goes to my granddaughter Sarah. The room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then my brother cleared his throat. My sister-in-law smiled into her coffee cup. My husband said nothing, but I felt him shift in his seat beside me. That small movement said everything. On the drive home, he was quiet until we hit the highway. Then he said, "So, what are you going to do with it? Fix cars?" I said I didn't know yet. He said, "Your grandfather loved you, Sarah. But he also left you a building full of old oil stains and broken lifts." And then he laughed a little, not cruelly, just casually, which somehow made it worse. That night, my brother and his wife came over for dinner. It was supposed to be a family thing, a way to process the grief together. Instead, it felt like a victory lap I hadn't been invited to take. My brother talked about renovation plans, about expanding the 3rd location, about investors his wife had already contacted. My husband listened with real interest, asking questions. Leaning forward. At some point my husband raised his glass toward my brother and said, "Your grandfather knew what he was doing. Knew who had the head for business." My brother smiled and said, "Well, Sarah got the shop. Maybe she'll open a mechanic school." Everyone laughed, my sister-in-law included. My husband glanced at me with a look that said, "I'm not going to defend you, but I also feel a little bad." I smiled. I told myself it didn't matter. But later, after everyone left, when the kitchen was clean and the kids were in bed, we have a daughter who is 9 and a son who is 6. My husband stood in the doorway and said something I have not forgotten since. He said, "Honestly, your grandfather didn't do you any favors." I was rinsing a glass. I didn't turn around. He said, "Your brother is going to build something real, and you got a liability. Property taxes on an empty building. Zoning fees. Whatever it costs to tear the thing down eventually." I turned off the faucet. He said, "I just think you should know how I see it. Because if you're planning to pour money into that place, we need to talk about that." There it was. Not your grandfather didn't love you. Not I'm sorry, this is hard. Just a clean, practical assessment of my worth as a financial decision. I said, "Okay. I hear you." He went to bed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The next morning was Saturday. I told him I was going to drive out to the shop and take a look at what was there. He said, "Sure, have fun," without looking up from his laptop. The drive took 40 minutes. The road narrowed after the county line, and eventually the shops and gas stations thinned out into flat open land. Route 9 was quiet that morning. A few trucks, a feed store, a church with a sign out front, and then the shop. It was smaller than I remembered from childhood. The sign had lost 2 letters, so it read Pops AUO Rep IR instead of Pops Auto Repair. The bay doors were rusted halfway shut. The parking lot had weeds growing through the asphalt in long, crooked lines. Someone had spray painted something on the side wall years ago, and the paint had faded to a gray smear. I used the key from the lawyer and let myself in through the side door. The smell hit me first. Old motor oil, concrete, metal, and underneath all of it something that smelled exactly like my grandfather's jacket. That particular combination of hardware store and cold weather and the soap he always used. I stood there for a moment and just breathed. The shop had 3 bays. 2 of the lifts were still there, though one had a broken hydraulic arm. The tool walls were mostly empty. Someone had taken the good equipment years ago, or my grandfather had sold it off piece by piece. There were a few cardboard boxes stacked in the corner, some folded drop cloths, a calendar from 11 years ago still hanging on the wall showing a picture of the Smoky Mountains. In the back, through a door that stuck at the bottom, was the office. This is where my grandfather had spent most of his time when the shop was running. I remembered sitting in here as a child while he did paperwork, eating crackers from his desk drawer, watching him write in his slow, careful handwriting. The desk was still there. Big, wooden, scratched across the top where 1,000 pens had dragged across it. The chair behind it was the same green vinyl chair I remembered, cracked now along the armrest. I sat down. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to him. Maybe I wanted to understand why, of everything he could have given me, he chose this. I opened the top drawer. A broken stapler, some dried-up pens, a roll of masking tape. I opened the side drawers one by one. Old invoices from suppliers. A copy of his auto repair license from 1987. A photograph of him and my grandmother standing in front of the shop when the paint was fresh and the sign was new, both of them squinting into the sun and smiling. I held that photograph for a while. Then I noticed the bottom drawer on the left side didn't open all the way. It stuck. I pulled harder and felt something shift inside. I reached in and found that a manila folder had fallen behind the hanging files and wedged itself against the back of the drawer. I pulled it out. Inside were papers. Not old ones, recent. The top sheet was dated 14 months ago. My grandfather's name was on it along with an address I recognized as the shop's Route 9 location. It was a letter from the county planning office. I read it once fast and then read it again slowly. The words were formal, but the meaning was clear. The county was extending Route 9 into a 4-lane commercial corridor. The project had been in planning for years. The extension would create a major interchange approximately 800 feet from the current end of the Route 9 commercial zone. Properties within the designated radius would be eligible for commercial rezoning. The shop's land fell inside that radius. My hands were steady. I don't know why. I kept reading. Underneath that letter was another one, from a development group I didn't recognize. They had reached out to my grandfather directly 18 months ago. They were interested in acquiring properties along the proposed corridor for a mixed commercial development. The letter listed the type of businesses they planned to bring in. Hotels, a gas station cluster, a fast food row, a retail strip. And they had made an offer. It was written clearly in the letter, a number that made me blink. Underneath that was another letter, same group, 6 months later. A follow-up. They mentioned that the previous offer still stood and they were eager to discuss terms. My grandfather had written one word at the top of that letter in his handwriting. Not yet. Not yet. I sat back in that cracked green chair and looked up at the water-stained ceiling tiles and tried to keep breathing normally. There was one more envelope at the bottom of the folder. It was sealed, and my name was written on the front in my grandfather's hand. Just Sarah. Nothing else. My fingers didn't shake when I opened it, but my chest was very tight. The letter inside was written on 2 pages of plain notebook paper. His handwriting was slower than I remembered, more careful, like he was concentrating on each word. It started, "If you are reading this, then things went the way I planned." I know that sounds like a strange thing to say. Let me explain. I have been watching you for a long time, Sarah. Not the way a grandfather watches a grandchild at birthday parties. I mean really watching. The way you listened when other people talked. The way you never made decisions fast. The way you always read the whole thing before you signed anything, even when it annoyed people. Your brother is a good man. He loves the restaurant. He will take care of it, and it will take care of him. That is the right match. But this land is a different thing. This land needs someone who will wait. Someone who will not sell the first time someone waves money at them. Someone who will read the letters I left and understand what they mean. The county approved the Route 9 extension 3 months ago. By the time you read this, the development companies will already be circling. They will come to you with offers. The first one will feel like more money than you have ever seen. It will not be the best offer. Wait. Read everything. Ask questions. You do not have to decide quickly. That is the whole point. I am giving you this because I know you will handle it right. Not because your brother would not, but because this is how I am saying, I see you, Sarah. I have always seen you. One more thing. When it is time, do not let anyone make this decision for you. Not your husband. Not your brother. Not me, even. This is yours. I love you very much. I folded the letter back along its creases. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, against my chest. I sat in that office for a long time after that. Long enough for the light through the small window to shift. Long enough for 2 trucks to pass on Route 9 outside and the sound of them to fade completely. My grandfather had known. He had planned this. While everyone at the will reading was feeling sorry for me, the whole thing had already been set in motion years before. The shop wasn't a consolation prize. It was the plan. I drove home slowly. I did not tell my husband what I had found. I want to be honest about that choice because some people reading this might think I was wrong to keep it from him. But I had just read a letter from a man I trusted with my whole life, and that letter said, "This is yours. Do not let anyone make this decision for you." So, I didn't say anything. I came home, made dinner, helped my daughter with her homework, put my son to bed, and sat across from my husband while he watched television. And I said nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, I read everything in that folder 4 times. I called the county planning office from my car during my lunch break at school. A woman confirmed that the Route 9 extension had been approved and that preliminary grading was expected to begin within 6 months. The interchange location she described put its nearest edge less than a quarter mile from the shop property. I asked about rezoning. She confirmed that parcels within the corridor would qualify for commercial designation once the project reached a certain phase. I looked up the development company from the letters. They were real. They had completed 3 similar projects in other counties over the past 8 years. Gas station clusters, hotel pads, fast food strips along newly expanded roads. Their projects were profitable. Very profitable. I called the number in the most recent letter on a Thursday afternoon. A man answered on the second ring. I told him my name and that I was the new owner of the Route 9 property. He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice changed into something careful and interested. He said my grandfather had been a tough negotiator. I said I learned from him. We set a meeting for the following Friday. I did one more thing before that meeting. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney on Wednesday afternoon. I told my husband I had a school thing. I sat across from an attorney in a quiet office, and I laid out my situation plainly. He explained what I needed to know about asset protection, about how inherited property is treated, about what steps I needed to take to ensure the shop remained solely mine regardless of what happened in the marriage. I want to be clear. I did not go to that attorney because I had decided to end my marriage that week. I went because my grandfather told me to read everything before I signed anything, and I was not going to let something I hadn't fully understood cost me what he left me. But sitting in that office, answering the attorney's questions, I realized something. I had been making myself smaller for a long time. Not dramatically. Not in ways that made headlines even inside my own home. Just quietly, consistently smaller. Laughing along. Saying, "I hear you," rinsing the glass and not turning around. I filed the paperwork that same day. My husband did not know. On Friday morning, 2 men arrived at the shop. One of them introduced himself as the development director I had spoken with on the phone. The other handled acquisitions. They were professional and polite. They did not look at the rusted bay doors or the cracked asphalt the way my husband had looked at this place. They looked at the land behind the building, at the flat open acreage that extended back from the shop, at the road frontage, at the sight lines. They measured. They took photographs. They spoke quietly to each other and made notes. Then we sat in the office around my grandfather's old desk. The development director folded his hands and said they were prepared to make a formal offer. He said once the interchange was complete, this location would become one of the most valuable parcels on the new corridor. He used words like anchor position and high traffic ingress and primary visibility zone. I nodded and said, I understood. He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it. I looked at the number. I kept my face completely still. It was more money than I would earn in the next 15 years of teaching. It was more than my brother's restaurant had grossed in its best year according to the family dinner conversations I had half listened to for a decade. I said I would need 10 days to consider it. I said I had questions about the structure of the deal and whether a partial land sale with retained development rights was something they had done before. He looked at me for a moment. Then he smiled in a way that felt like genuine respect. He said yes, they had done that before, and he would have his team put together an alternative structure document for me to review. I thanked them both and walked them out. I stood in the parking lot in the cold and watched their car pull onto Route 9 and disappear. Then I went back inside and sat in my grandfather's chair and let myself feel it for exactly 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes of sitting there with my eyes closed and my hands flat on the desk. Then I picked up the folder and locked it in the bottom drawer where his letter had been. My brother called that evening. He said his wife had mentioned running into someone from the planning office at a community meeting and hearing something about the Route 9 project. He said he didn't know if that affected my property at all. His voice was careful, feeling something out. I said, I'm still learning about it. He said, okay, well, let me know if you need anything. I said I would. What I noticed, and what I want to say clearly, he was not a bad person. Neither was my husband, in the way that people are simply bad. They were people who had decided, without ever announcing it, that I was the kind of person whose inheritance was a polite tragedy. That assessment was wrong. But I also understood it because I had helped them form it over many years of making myself easier to overlook. 2 weeks after the developer meeting, I called my brother and suggested we have dinner. Just the two couples, at a restaurant he liked downtown. He said that sounded nice. My husband seemed surprised I was the one organizing it, but said sure. The evening started the way those evenings always do. Wine, bread, menus, the kind of conversation that fills space without really landing anywhere. My brother talked about the renovation at the second restaurant location. His wife talked about their son's baseball league. My husband talked about a project at work. At some point, my brother asked how the shop situation was going. I said, actually, I wanted to talk about that. My husband looked up. I said, I've had a couple of meetings out there. With the county and with a development group. My brother said, development group? I said, Route 9 is being expanded. 4 lanes. New interchange going in about a quarter mile from the shop. My sister-in-law said, wait, really? I said, the county approved it. Construction starts in a few months. The land around the interchange is being rezoned for commercial use. My husband said, what does that mean for the shop? I said, it means the shop property is sitting in a very good position. He said, what kind of position? I placed the folder on the table. Not the original one from the shop, a copy, organized the way my attorney had suggested, clear and easy to read. I opened it to the offer page. My brother leaned forward first. His wife's hand stopped moving. My husband picked it up. He read it once. He looked at me. He read it again. He said, is this real? I said, that's the first offer. I have a follow-up meeting scheduled about a different structure. Partial land sale, retained development rights. The attorney thinks the overall value could be considerably higher over time. My brother said, considerably higher than this? I said, yes. The table was very quiet. Someone at the next table laughed at something. A waiter asked if we needed anything. I said no thank you. We're good. My husband set the folder down carefully. Like it was fragile. He looked at me differently than I had seen him look at me in a long time. Not with pity. Not with amusement. With something I can only describe as recalibration, like a person who had been using a map that turned out to be wrong. He said, your grandfather knew about this? I said, yes. He left me a letter. My brother said quietly, Pop always said he had a reason for everything. I said. He did. My husband said. Sarah, I said some things. About the property. I said, you did. He said. I didn't understand what it was. I said, I know. But I did. Nobody said anything for a moment. My sister-in-law reached over and touched my hand. It was a small gesture, and I think it was genuine. My brother looked at his wine glass and then back at me and said he was sorry, that he should have asked more questions that he had assumed. I said I understood. My husband asked if we could talk later, at home. I said, yes. There is something I need to tell you at home. What I told him, when we got there, after the kids were asleep, was that I had filed for divorce. I told him calmly. I told him it was not a reaction to that specific evening, that I had been thinking about it for a while, that the meeting with the attorney had clarified things that I had been avoiding for a long time. I told him that I still thought he was a capable person and that I wanted us to handle everything as respectfully as possible for the sake of our children. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if there was anything he could have done differently. I said, probably. But I think we would have gotten here eventually. He didn't fight it. I think some part of him had known, the way people know things they don't say out loud, that something between us had been off for a long time. The property situation hadn't caused it. It had just clarified it, the way strong light clarifies what's already there. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. My attorney ensured the Route 9 property remained entirely mine, as it had always legally been. Inheritance is not a marital asset, and I want to say that plainly for anyone who might be wondering. My husband did not contest it. He was fair about the house and the children's arrangements. I will say that for him. The development deal closed 3 months after the divorce. I did not sell the entire parcel. My grandfather's letter had said the first offer would not be the best one, and he was right. The final structure was a long-term ground lease with a land purchase option and a development profit share attached. My attorney called it one of the cleaner deals she'd seen come through a rural corridor project. The income it generates is enough that I could stop teaching if I wanted to. I do not want to stop teaching. But it matters that I don't have to. The last time I drove out to Route 9, the grading equipment was already there. A long stretch of land had been turned over, red clay pushed back from the road in long curved rows. The old shop sign was gone. The building itself was coming down next month to make way for site prep. But the property line was still mine. The stakes with the orange flags on them marked what belonged to me. The acreage that was going to become something. I thought about my grandfather sitting in that green chair at the end of a long day, writing receipts in his careful handwriting, watching trucks roll past on Route 9, knowing something that no one else around him could quite see yet. Patient, quiet, waiting. He told me I read before I act. He said that is why this belongs to you. I used to think being patient was something people praised in you when they couldn't find anything more impressive to say. I used to think keeping quiet was the same thing as being overlooked. I understand now that those things are not the same at all. My daughter asked me last week what the orange flags meant, the ones she saw when I drove her past on the way home from her soccer game. I told her they mark property lines. She asked whose property. I said ours. She said, ours like our families? I said, ours like yours and mine and your brother's. Someday. She looked out the window at the flags for a while. Then she said, Grandpa, left it to you? I said, Great-grandpa. And yes, she said. Why you and not uncle? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the letter in my jacket pocket that day. About the way certain things are given not because you asked for them, but because someone watched you long enough to know you would do the right thing with them. I said, because he trusted me to wait. She seemed to think that was a satisfying answer. She turned back to the window. The flags moved a little in the wind off the fields, orange against the flat gray sky. I kept driving. The road opened up ahead of us, wide and straight, the way it always does when you finally stop looking over your shoulder.